Hello, everyone. This month we had another wonderful discussion talking about language and peace. This month's theme was language for getting along with others. So I'll summarize a little bit today about our discussion. So we looked at a few questions about getting along with others. What does it mean to get along well with someone? What happens when conflict arises with someone you usually get along with? We talked about who do you get along well with, who do you want to get along with better, and then we broadened the idea to how language can help us get along with each other better in general. Talking about what it means to get along with each other, communication was a big part of it. Communication and also dealing with conflict. Um, People talked about feeling comfortable to communicate about problems before they get bigger, and that being a foundational aspect of getting along well. We noted that a lot of large conflicts escalate from misunderstandings and a lack of communication or miscommunication. And constructive conflict can sometimes mean avoiding conflict, like when working with annoying neighbors, maybe thanking them for the kindness that they do show instead of complaining might be a better way to get along. But sometimes we also need to talk about important issues. But we emphasize that before this kind of verbal football, before this kind of debate can be enjoyable, we need to warm up. We need to have regular communication to get to know each other. And we need to have that foundation for a constructive debate. Debate itself can lead to a lot of conflict if that's the only mode we have. So establishing the relationship ahead of time is important. We also noted that getting along can look very different depending on culture, language, and personal differences. Some people talked about that they learned growing up getting along means just being patient and listening and following along. But when these participants started learning English, it changed their attitude and it changed their voice. In some cultures, communication without verbalization is really common and expected. But in some cultures where there aren't as many shared assumptions, people have to verbalize to be able to get along with each other. And we noted that ways of using language are sometimes different. Even when we use the same words or language, depending on the person, we can understand each other completely differently. People have a different sense of the words depending on their experience. The term code switching from language learning, meaning switching between languages, switching back and forth between languages, is a helpful metaphor we realize to navigate getting along in different contexts. We noted that we naturally have the ability to shift to different versions of ourselves and our communication styles, depending on the language, depending on our cultures in our context. And we can figure out how to get along better in a way that's appropriate for that language and culture. And we acknowledge that we each already have the right language to understand others, to deal with conflict well. It doesn't always come out, but we have that capacity. And so sharing our stories, sharing our experiences of how we get along well in different languages and cultures can help us build this awareness and bring out these abilities of code switching. We talked about how speaking in different languages can be a challenge and it can also be a gift if we're trying to get along. Again, people talked about the role of learning English and how in English people tend to have more self-disclosure, and learning to be ourselves in another culture can be important because that gives us a sense of belonging and a sense of contribution that we can um, connect with that community. And whatever language we're speaking, we need to try to talk in the culture that the language belongs to, using the rationality and emotionality that that culture acknowledges. So we have to kind of switch our way of seeing the world as well. Some languages, when we're learning, it's hard to find vocabulary to talk about our feelings in detail. So this is not something that's usually taught in foreign language classes, and we need more practice in helping to explain how we're feeling in a different language. And we shared stories about how when we speak other languages, there's a kind of magic that can happen. When we are listening and speaking in a language that we didn't grow up with, sometimes our hearts can open in a new way. We can connect with people in a way that we didn't do before. Or if we're in a foreign place surrounded by language that is not familiar, imagine the impact of hearing our native language and the instant connection that we have with somebody who tries to speak our language. Changing cultures and relationships over time can also shift how we understand getting along. We talked about how urbanization and cultural changes have led to less connection among neighbors and in our neighborhoods. And we have fewer chances to get along because we just don't interact with each other. And concepts of getting along can change over time as well. In a workplace, for example, it used to be that just working together meant we were getting along. But now there's a need for, in some context, to deliberately connect in a more intentional way to build relationships. We also acknowledge the sadness or the grief that's there when it's time to let go of a relationship, that we can't always get along with everyone. But we also acknowledge that when that happens, time can bring some healing and maybe a new perspective on the relationship. Maybe we can still learn about getting along through those difficult relationships as well. In any case, when we get to know a person deeper and hear about their situation and their stories and where they're coming from, it's much easier to get along. So, sharing our stories and our histories can be a way that we connect with each other better. So this was a very interesting topic. Had a lot of time to share stories with each other. We met in small groups to have a chance to share more and to talk more with each other. And it was a really fun time to discuss together. So in 2024, we're looking forward to new topics and new connections. And we welcome you to join us for English Collective Meetup then.